It is Monday morning, November 28th, 2011, the first Monday after the first Sunday of Advent, the new church year. I'm going to begin with the Gospel of Mark, Mark 13, where we were yesterday, and get that in front of us, and then back up a little bit and go a bit wider, broader, and talk about Advent and talk about who we are as a people of God in Advent. Since we've now started a new church year, we enter into the Gospel primarily of Mark for this year. Jesus says in Mark 13:32, we get a little bit of this ahead of this for the Gospel, but for our purposes this morning, Mark 13:32. But about that day or hour no one knows, Jesus says, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And so what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. So we step into Advent, and so I was looking for some easy place to step into this really important season that is Advent, because we step very quickly into the season of Thanksgiving and post-Thanksgiving and Christmas, rushing about and hurrying about and getting ready for Christmas. The season of Advent is a time that we simply watch, that we as a people of God watch. A preacher named Randy Hyde began a sermon by saying that it's odd that the church would choose this time of the year to begin the church new year, because in our world, at least, the world continues to get darker and darker and darker. And that's what Advent says. Advent says that the world continues to get darker and darker and darker. And the season of this new church year is an acknowledgement that the world keeps getting darker and darker and darker. And so I simply encourage the saints of University Lutheran to strike a match and to find a fire and to light a candle and to watch. All of the text for Sunday, Isaiah 64, Isaiah pleads with God in the most awful of times, in the exile and in the deportation of the people of Israel to Babylon. Rend the heavens, O God, and come. This is our hope. Even in that text from Isaiah 64, it says that even our righteous deeds are as filthy rags, because that's not our hope. The one piercing hope of the people of Isaiah, the generation before that, the generation to come after that, is that God would rend the heavens and come. It's God's presence in our life that we will begin to define ourselves theologically. That is, we will begin to define ourselves by the presence of God in our lives, in our everyday lives, in our everyday tasks, in our everyday busyness, is the hope of who we are. We get that from the Psalm. Psalm 80 says that stir up your power, O God, and come. It's where we get all of our Advent prayers. Stir up your power, O God, and come. There's this refrain that comes of that psalm. Restore us, O God, let your face shine so that we shall be saved. 3 times. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. Restore us, the last verse. Restore us, O Lord, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. That our saving, that our salvation, that our goodness, that our hope is in our waiting and watching and recognizing when God stirs up God's power and come. So it is for the people of Isaiah, so it is for the psalmist, so it is for the people of Corinth, that Paul says, as you wait, in the day when Jesus come, may you be found blameless. But as you wait, this is our one piercing hope, not our gifts, not our tongues, not our teaching, not our preaching. The one hope of who we are as a people of God is that we recognize in Advent that this is God's time, or as I wanted to say it yesterday, this is Christ's time. Christmas, Advent, it's Christ time, that we recognize that we need to define ourselves by this God coming, by our watching and waiting carefully for Christ to arrive. As a baby in Bethlehem, for sure, but in these first weeks of Advent, for Christ to come again is our one piercing hope as a people of God. This is what defines us. That we strike a match, that we find a fire, and that we light a candle, and that we sit and define ourselves by that waiting, by that watching. We do lots of things in the church anymore, like Blue Christmases and services of healing, which are good things. To say that in this season, in the holiday season, the holidays tend to be a very difficult time of the year for lots of people, for lots of reasons, for divorce, for death, for illness, for loss, in lots of different shapes and forms. And so it's a good thing to make room for that in liturgy, in ritual. But what I said yesterday is really Advent is that. We haven't paid very good careful attention to what Advent says and does, that we have to reinvent that in Blue Christmas, or we have to redo that in services of healing, because when we define ourselves theologically, when we define ourselves by the hope that God will rend the heavens and come, then our mourning, our sadness, in fact, we got a word yesterday of a member's dad dying. That then sadness is defined by, is held in our hope that Christ comes. And the sadnesses of all of our lives that, again, whether the rituals of our Christmas and our holidays and our family things are broken by divorce or loss or death or distance, that all of that is defined and held theologically by our striking a match, finding a flame, lighting a candle, and watching and waiting. That the very hope of Isaiah, that the very hope of the psalmist, that the very hope of the people of Mark, the very hope of the people of Corinth is that Christ comes. That God shows up and arrives and takes up God's place in our lives and in our world. And so Jesus says in Mark 13, watch. You've been given this to do. Let this watching define you. Let this watching define everything you do today, whether that be a joy or a sorrow, whether that be a gladness or a tear, whether that be the celebration of Thanksgiving and or Christmas, that this Advent is the place that we understand anew. It certainly shouldn't be unique to Advent, but that we understand, and to say it anew, that our one piercing hope is that Jesus comes. Oftentimes when the church talks about that, it's given over to flaky prophets who try to determine days and hours and time and calendar dates. And that's not the point of what Jesus says. The point of what Jesus says is that in our watching and waiting and careful preparations, it defines who we are in this day. It defines who we are in this season that gets darker and darker and darker. And so our hope isn't in anything else around us. If we don't define ourselves in Advent by this, we will be defined either by choice or by default or by pure accident. There are lots of things that will define our season and us and our day if we don't do it carefully in this Christ. So a good word for all of us in this first Monday of Advent is to light an Advent wreath in your home, to light a simple candle in your home, to be reminded that this is how you are defined by the Christ, by the God who rends the heavens and comes and the mountains shake and the earth quivers, and that our one profound, enduring hope of this day is that Christ comes. Grace to you and peace in that. A most blessed Advent.